pick it up. I'm Jim Price, and today I want to talk about 10 tweakable cards. These are cards where I really like the direction, but the execution just needs a little bit more. When you look at the evolution of a card, sometimes it's iterative, and the next iteration would be perfect if it follows the same idea. Sometimes a card nerfs itself unnecessarily or shows its age. Sometimes it's a simple oversight that has unintended consequences. For these cards, I try to pick unique abilities so that not every card feels the same, because the uniqueness is a large part of why I like these cards. So let's get into the list, which is in no particular order. Leaf Armor is an interesting card because it's power that can be seeded in advance, but the power can move. It's a unique combination of power activation and persistent power. You need a staging minion for Leaf Armor, but you can send them into another minion later when you are ready to score. I like how Leaf Armor can temporarily push someone out of destruction range, but eventually help someone else score. My problem with Leaf Armor is that the fairies don't really have an opportunity to play it, even with their extra actions from Puck, which doesn't lend itself to many of the fairy actions. You have very flexible plays already with Enchantment, Fairy Ballet, Daisy Chain, Magic Acorns, Magic Ward, and Ladybug. Pretty much anything but playful tricks. There's also the issue that with these types of light modifiers, Smash Up is all over the place. Destruction Prevention, +1 power and Destruction Prevention, +1 power and Light Protection. The list goes on. The fairy mobility is the differentiating factor, but it doesn't necessarily feel like enough, and I find Leaf Armor rarely played as a result. It's really hard to pick a small change to fix Leaf Armor, but I'd actually merge it with Ladybug to have +1 power and Destruction Prevention. Yes, that makes some other cards look bad, but the problem is with those cards, and there are other double features that do more. This would free up any action slot to give fairies a change of venue style action, which makes perfect sense for flipping Daisy Chain and Enchantment. Right now, Leaf Armor's lack of opportunities for just 1 power makes a free card like A stand out. This segues nicely into my next card, A. A is great, it's a free 1 power, but this card is surprisingly inflexible in that it requires you to play an action first. Believe it or not, this is actually significant. One time I was playing Moose Nado and I needed 1 power. I actually played Ripped Off with nothing to target just so that I could play A for that 1 power. In a perfect world, A would be a standard action played any time for 1 power, but with a special that it could follow an action and return to the hand once per turn. And this should be a strict once per turn limitation rather than the first action. Why does this matter when A is free? First, the information conveyed is not free. Second, you may not actually have A in your hand at the time its reaction would take place. And that's a big issue for cards that draw cards while adding temporary power. And there just so happens to be a faction in the same set that does this very thing. This is one of those small adjustments that add flexibility, and flexibility is always welcome, as inflexibility is not a good nerf in my opinion. My next card is Salvage of the Dwarves, which plays a treasure minion modifier as a base scores. It must be a minion modifier, must be played on your minion, and that minion must be on the scoring base. None of those requirements are unreasonable. And I like this card because it represents a different approach from the stack and score nature of the Dwarves. The issue is that the treasures don't have many candidates in the 22 card deck. There are 10 minion modifiers, which isn't a bad percentage, but you don't get all 10 of those cards. 3 of them have talents that would not apply before the base scores: Boots of Running Really Fast, Magic Missile, and Potion of Redundancy Potion. And it's really hard for Magic Missile to be in the discard. Unless you are playing treasures for the sake of playing treasures, those are blank abilities. And one of those cards is bad for you, Potion of Cowardice. That leaves 6 candidates. Buckler of Swashing is unlikely to be meaningful. Chainsaw is a combo card that has the same payout as other specials that are much more flexible. Jetpack is great. Chest of Holding, situationally great. Knee Pads is risky as a special and hard to pull off. Boots of Butt Kicking may be the best because it can trigger an extra action. Sure, this card gets better with the Loot Lover, but given that most of the good cards would already be on it, the opportunities have felt limited to me. My tweak would be the Expert Timing approach. If it has a talent, let them use a talent, because there's a restricted set to what this would allow. This would allow Boots of Running Really Fast to become a runaway card. Magic Missile could be a live and let chum. Potion of Redundancy Potion becomes a very impactful one-off instead of a very impactful repeated usage, which definitely serves as a gotcha. And Salvage becomes the card that facilitates all of this without knowing exactly what's going to happen, which is a good thing. Sticking with Munchkin is Join the Club. You can make an argument that Join the Club and Good Habits are a bit redundant, and Good Habits should just be the double feature here. That's not the issue. The issue is that all minions get power there, including monsters, which defeats the purpose of the card that gives temporary power. I actually really like it when cards exploit other players in this sense, because it's a risky gambit that you can math out, but the fact that monsters block it is very frustrating. This card can easily apply to all minions controlled by players to accomplish what the card feels like what it should do. I truly wonder how intentional the monster blocking is. At worst, it slows the game down even more with the higher breakpoints. With this modified wording, it would even work with controlled monsters, and that feels better. My next card is Heirloom, a rare triple feature. Heirlooms cap out at 3 power each for a total of 9 power, which is basically 3 cyber evolutions. But what Heirloom does well is the rate at which you get the power, which is power creep friendly. The rate is 149. The problem is, it's really hard to do, especially with princesses and their above average power. Griselda's recursion is good, but drawing her early with a minion star faction can be a problem. I've already talked about how Heirloom is an odd fit for princesses and really should go to fairies, but I think you can salvage this card by having Griselda play an Heirloom or recur one. I'd also consider giving princesses a 4th Heirloom, which would be way better than Fairy Godmother. If you look at the closest comparable card, it's War Raptor at 4 copies, so this feels like a natural solution. You can ditch the destruction prevention if needed, since it doesn't seem like a card you'd want to destroy in most cases. My next card is Entangled, which is really dealt a bad hand. Entangled offers something very rare, the unblockable ability for your opponent to not do something. The value it provides over Deep Roots is supposed to be that it works for more bases and also applies to your rivals. But looking closely at the ability, you can inadvertently block yourself if you're trying to block someone else at the same time. The only reason I could think of this, which is a bad reason, is when you're playing your own bear cavalry and you don't want someone to move. There are better ways of solving that problem. But looking even deeper, Entangled only blocks a few effects, namely return and move. Place was in the game, and has been used sparingly since, but Shuffle would later appear as well. Entangled doesn't block either of those, even though thematically and mechanically it should. I almost wish there was a general purpose displacement term that these abilities could cover, and it can grow as much as you need. If you are in play, you cannot forcefully be removed outside an automatic discard. But looking even further, Entangled doesn't even do what it should do best, block after scoring specials. And this is because of our old friend, instead of the discard pile. Because that clause retroactively defers the movement, the minion is not on the base to block it, because they are leaving and moving simultaneously, and some key Entangled victories no longer happened. My Entangled blocking Flying Monkey? Not anymore. But the spirit of a card that is both offensive and defensive is very intriguing. To me, Entangled should be like a Mark of Sleep, a blanket cancellation that lasts 1 turn. Other players cannot move minions or return them to the hand. It captures most of what should happen while not being hit by the rules as much. Keeping with the idea of inadvertently blocking yourself, my next card has the same unexpected effect, but also adds anti-synergy. Form a Posse. Now, these global power boosts with additional effects are already good cards, and the extra effects are above what comparable cards do. But if you're going to do it right. For Form a Posse, it should have a by other players clause. This is the type of card to play pre-Sheriff because the power boosts matter most in Phase 2, which enables Sheriff. This means in an overpayment situation, Sheriff's Duel can play Stagecoach to pull off from that base and double score. Now I realize the other dueling cards would probably have to be reworded to block destruction in the same manner, but that's a good change anyway, because it gives credit to the opposing player. Or just scrap dueling altogether. But the idea within the same faction hurting themselves is something I want to avoid at all times. My number 8 card is the only minion in this list, Aramis. Aramis used to be a talent, but I think he was switched because of werewolves and the Great Talent Killer. Or possibly because of clarity, it's honestly hard to remember. As a talent, you get talent-based synergies and a clear timing, even though the ongoing is bankable. If the intent is for Aramis to work only on your turn, talent incorporates that. What you do lose is the ability to play the extra action immediately, though I doubt that's a consideration. But what happened to Aramis is that he fell victim to a little-known occurrence known as During Gate, 1G, and it's trademarked. Rather subtly, in International Incident, the definition of during was changed to reflect your Phase 2 rather than throughout your turn, and it was done so in a place where you'd never look to find it. This obviously impacts cards like Armor Stego. Intentionally or not, this was reverted in Culture Shock, so does that retroactively change Aramis? The issue is that Aramis specifically has a clarification that it does not work with Last Stand, and that should never happen in the same faction. Just let it work. If not, why bother with Last Stand at all? It makes the Musketeers much less one-dimensional. I enjoy Aramis for what it is, especially Heirloom, but this card can be so much more interesting if special synergies happened. The bravado of hoping to steal a base from behind would be very thematic, but I guess the game doesn't want any factions doing that with specials. Right now, Last Stand feels like my most discarded Musketeer action, and Aramis can change that. My number 9 card is Staying Alive. I want to ask, were this not a disco song, would this card and ability even exist? Of the disco actions, 6 of them are standard actions that can be copied. One is a modifier that facilitates copying those. The other 2 are general purpose actions that give the disco versatile extra plays. Staying Alive is a bit of an outlier unless you view it through the same lens of Celebration and Its Raining Men, as general purpose utility. I like this card because it puts the focus on copies of the card, and it's a hard recursion card, and recursion should be hard. But when you look at it compared to other recursion cards, it feels unnecessarily limited. It's much harder to trigger. Granted, disco should not be as good at recursion, but it also isn't copyable, which is their main theme. Zombies are obviously too strong, but their double feature goes directly into play. But the Elder Thing recursion goes to the deck and gives you an extra action, and you can get anyone. Other cards go to your hand, but those are stronger recursion factions again. Staying Alive can be really hard to trigger, because the more likely a card is to trigger, the less likely that is the card you want. So to allow it to be copyable, why not allow the chosen minion to gain power equal to the copies in the discard? Unless you are playing locals, this is pretty power capped. And if you manage to pull this off with locals, more power to you, because this would require a ton of setup and would have to be late game, and you're in trouble if you don't pull it off. I think you're in trouble either way. Besides, there are other combos that can more easily eclipse that copyable power threshold. If you can create a cool locals combo without Dagon, isn't that the goal? Staying Alive would then offer a chance to balance quantity and quality and create interesting opportunities. When you think about it, it's rather self-balancing. A diva would get 2 power, but would need another card to copy it, or 2 divas could get 1 power. You'd never take a roller for 3 power unless it were 3 power counters, but other recruits could be intriguing, and it gives disco 1 more chance at copying, even though the temporary power would only be meaningful in the right situations. I do think it could work though, because they expect Get Down Tonight to work at +2. Staying Alive only looks worse because comparable cards look better, which is the real problem, but for a card in Expansion 13, its limitations are certainly felt. My final card was foreshadowed by Entangled, and it's a no-brainer, Mark of Sleep. Mark of Sleep, when taken literally, is one of the most comical oversights. You can make a legitimate argument that Mark of Sleep should hit every player. This is much less take that, because it spreads it to everyone, and we can all agree that tricksters need the help. But the obvious change is that this should really be errataed because Mark of Sleep affects them on their next turn. They can play a billion special actions on your turn because the sleep effect will not take place until later. This is just sad. Mark of Sleep should be tweaked so that the players cannot play actions until the start of your next turn, and unless you're doing something crazy like breaking Portal Room, that's good enough. And if you don't like the idea of it targeting every player, then give it a draw or an action so that it's not just my action cancels your action, because the tricksters can't keep pace with that. With the tendency of cards to build on top of each other, there's always a chance that one of these archetypes can reappear in its final form in the future. Which of these cards do you like? Do you agree with the changes, or were you thinking of other cards? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, let's shut it down.